Rick Springfield, but they hadn't been able to get one radio station for me. To Top 40 Radio, I was a heavy metal guy. By the time I went into the studio to record Street Machine, I was over trying to get a Top 40 hit. That record sold about 350,000 when it was released in September 1979. After years of opening concerts for everybody and their uncle, people started to think I could be a headliner. Louis Messina of Pace Concerts in Texas packaged me with Pat Travers, who was on the charts with the hit Boom Boom Out Go the Lights, and the Scorpions, the German hard rock band who were just starting out in this country. We sold out everywhere. It was unbelievable. We were doing 10, 12,000 seats. It was a low ticket price and it was a package deal, but it was the first time I did a headline tour. But Capitol Records still didn't get me. I had just done a headline tour selling out arenas and they couldn't get me past 350,000 records. My business had quadrupled, not just the box office, but t-shirts, everything. I was becoming a genuine rock star on stage. In England, I was on the cover of Melody Maker and New Musical Express. They took a picture of me in shorts, high socks, tennis shoes, and a tank top with my Trans Am and my Explorer. I looked fucking mean. One headline said, Van Halen, look in your rearview mirror. We sold out 14 theater shows in England before we even left this country. My last album for Capitol, Danger Zone, released in June 1980, simply reinforced that Capitol did not know what to do with me. It sold another 350,000 copies, even though I was packing venues all over America. I sold out the Oakland Coliseum Stadium that 4th of July. Originally, Tom Scholz, the genius guitarist behind Boston, was going to produce. He came out and did pre-production, but his record company decided he should be working on another Boston album, not somebody else's record. They were going to sue him, so he left. The next day, I hired somebody I knew, named Jeff Workman, at the last minute, because we were already kind of in the studio ready to go. Workman, an engineer who worked with Queen's producer, had just finished recording an album with Journey and their new lead vocalist, Steve Perry, and I liked what I heard. Scholz was upset that I replaced him so quickly, but I told him I didn't have money to burn. I needed to get going and get back on the road. That's when I really broke wide open. Touring in support of Danger Zone, I saw was really starting to happen for me. I saw with my own eyes. At every concert, people were singing my songs. They knew who I was. I could see it coming every night. From the time I began playing music, I put my nose to the grindstone, head down, rolled up my sleeves, and went forward. I'd never made it, and I'd never had any money. When I came back, my accountant told me I had $300,000 in the bank. What do you want to do? She said. I made an album a year for the 5 years at Capitol while I was touring constantly. I would come off the road and go in the studio. If I wasn't touring, I was making a record. The label paid tour support, but because my records weren't selling that well, and I was constantly on the road, I wasn't earning out the expenses. I had done well in England and other European countries, but Capitol never paid me a single royalty. In fact, they told me I owed them $175,000. I had a really bad record deal. I was getting about 20 cents a record. I was spending more money on tour than I was earning. I decided to sue Capitol. John Kalodner, the big cheese A&R man at Geffen Records, wanted me to sign to the label David Geffen had just started. At that point, he had only signed John Lennon and Donna Summer. They offered me $1 million deal. I was getting 50 grand a record from Capitol and owed them money. But the money Geffen gave me paid for the lawsuit. One day we walked into court at Marin Civic Center and the judge told Capitol, I think you folks have made enough money off this young fella. He let me out of the deal. I walked away a free man. Geffen broke me on the charts. I finally had hit records that matched my box office on the road. Capitol never managed that. Capitol didn't market me. They didn't give a crap. It was especially sweet when I signed with Geffen and shoved it up Capitol's ass with my first gold and my first platinum album. That was the beginning of a 16-year streak of million-seller albums. Kalodner was the greatest A&R guy. He got Jimmy Penerick of Survivor to co-write a song with me, Heavy Metal, and sold it to the movie even before the album came out. Jonathan Cain of Journey and I co-wrote a song too. Kalodner tried to put me together with different writers, but I didn't like writing with other people. I was not that confident to be sitting around a guy I didn't really know and showing my ideas. start tightening up. I didn't feel like I could express myself well enough. Besides, I take everything personally. But I wrote 28 songs for the album. Kalodner suggested Keith Olsen as producer, and I liked that idea. Olsen produced Fleetwood Mac and Pat Benatar. We made a great record, Standing Hampton, no question about it, with an instant top 40 hit, I'll Fall in Love Again, when it was released in January 1982. Went out on tour, headlining arenas, double nights in a lot of places, and I became rich and famous right then and there. After Geffen signed me, everything changed. The turn of fate that happened in my life was unbelievable. I had plenty of money for my record deal with Geffen, and Kalodner didn't want me to even think about going on the road. For the first time in my adult life, I was home for almost a year. Since I started in the business, I've never been home. Betsy was as happy as a lark. I built a swimming pool for my house. I grabbed my old pal David Louser, who was with me in the Justice Brothers, and put a band together. I had money, I had a band, I had a crew. For years I've been working my ass off. Family life was something that just sort of happened to me. I barely noticed. I got married and had a baby while I was struggling with the band. When my son was a child, I went out on the road. I couldn't always afford it, but even after I could afford it, taking Betsy and a small child was never easy. When Aaron was older, we put him in a boarding school, North Country School in Lake Placid, New York, and Betsy started going on tour with me. She couldn't stand touring. She hated flying. She didn't like hotel rooms and living out of suitcases. My marriage was always a struggle. If she wasn't on the road every night, calling home meant arguments. I was messing around a lot, as much as I could. I still wasn't doing drugs or falling down drunk, but I started living the life a little bit. I tried not to get involved in anything serious. That way I could at least convince myself that I wasn't really doing any damage. Almost across the street from Aaron's school on the highway, there was this log cabin that was for sale and wasn't expensive. It was a log cabin kit with a big loft, 5 acres in the back. I bought it and we tried to spend as much time as possible there. And I was always on tour. We'd go back there for Thanksgiving. That was the law. They didn't allow students to go home for Thanksgiving because they had this big deal Thanksgiving feast that the kids prepared. We went back there for Thanksgiving. That was about it. Success really motivated me. Ed Leffler was amazed. You're different than anyone I ever met in this business, he told me. Fame and fortune inspire you. You get better. I've never known anyone in my entire life like that in the music industry. The more success you have, the better you get. You jump on that stage now. You're so much better than you were when you were hungry. When I was hungry, I lacked confidence. I was afraid to let my heart and soul out. I was hiding. I was faking it. It seeped through. You could hear it in my voice. My actions were not true and honest, so they didn't connect. I was bluffing, acting the part. It took fame and fortune for me to become myself. That gave me the confidence I needed to bring out what I really have to offer, whatever it is. I started to get more real. I took what was left of that big money advance from Geffen and started buying property in Fontana. I didn't think I would have that much longevity as a rock star, and I never wanted to be poor again. My mom instilled that in me. You've got to have something to fall back on. I started building apartment buildings in Fontana. I went to my brother-in-law James, who was an electrical contractor and had gotten a contractor's license. My nephew also became an electrician, and one of their friends became the plumber. I made them all partners. We built 9 apartment buildings. I bought the old houses we rented when I was growing up. That was my first entrepreneurial effort, and we did really well. Shortly after we'd started building the apartments, the fire department came to my brother-in-law and said he needed to put a fire hydrant in front of every apartment building. He told the fire department that his plumber could put fire sprinklers in the building that would be more effective for about the same price. The insurance companies went along because sprinklers put out fires before fire departments could even get there. But the fire department needed some convincing. We staged a demonstration for them. We bought one of my old houses, sprinkled it, and then lit a fire in the trash can. We waited for the neighbors to call the fire department, which was parked waiting right down the street. And by the time they got there, the sprinklers put everything out. The house was still totally cool. Fire sprinkling is amazing. It really saves lives. The city passed an ordinance that gave us some money. Before long, we had 180 employees and ran the second largest fire sprinkler company in America, Fire Chief Inc. The next thing I did was the travel agency. I started a travel agency because I was traveling so much for tours that I was paying my travel agent a small fortune. I decided to start my own, Steady State Travel in Mill Valley. Hired the two ladies that used to work for the old travel agency and gave them a piece of the action. It didn't make a lot of money, but it also didn't cost me anything when I went on tour. I started Red Rocker Clothing, which was a disaster because the rag trade is the craziest business in the world. I had this great idea to make these upscale flannel shorts. I bought the flannel from Ralph Lauren. He had this line of flannel shirts and stuff, and it was the baddest flannel. I lost probably $300,000 because I got a huge order I couldn't fill from JCPenney's. I was late. I ended up with $65,000 worth of these flannel shorts in my warehouse because they wouldn't take them. Some of them didn't have buttons. I was trying to rush them out so fast. The next year, everybody had flannel shorts. Very tough business. You come up with an idea, and the next year everybody flat rips you off, and you have to come up with something fresh. I bowed out. While I lost some money on the clothes, I ended up starting something else that made money. Bike stores. It was Bucky who got me into the bikes. Bucky, my old pal who I used to help steal albums from the ABC store and who turned me on to Fresh Cream, was living in an apartment on B Street in San Rafael with his wife Joelle and their son Benny. He'd married her in Rochester, but she ran away with some other guy and they split up for a while. Bucky took her back after he moved to California, which is when they had their kid. Bucky was always around. I took him to England with me as my roadie and truck driver, and when we did Red, Ed Leffler loved him, but he was tough on the other guys. He was hardcore and always looking out for me. Plus, he was into drugs and drinking and could be an asshole. We had to cool him out from time to time. Eventually, Bucky took a job at this bike shop, the Corte Madera Cyclery, an old-time Schwinn dealership. This was right around the time that two guys named Steve Potts and Gary Fisher were inventing the mountain bike in Marin County. They took a fat tire cruiser bike and put gears on it from a 10-speed. They rode these bikes up and down Mount Tam. One day, Bucky took me in the back of Corte Madera Cyclery and made me a mountain bike. Right away, Bucky and I were riding our bikes everywhere. He biked to work every day, rain or shine. Between his biking and mine, I saw the mountain bike business coming, and it really appealed to me. He told me I could buy the store for around $75,000, pretty cheap. All I had to do was buy the inventory. It was a small store. I bought the store, and he started making mountain bikes. We were the mountain bike kings. All these guys were bringing their cruisers to Bucky, and he converted them to mountain bikes. At the store, Bucky couldn't put mountain bikes together fast enough. We had to hire mechanics. Seeing the success of that store, I had an idea to open an even bigger bike store, a superstore that would carry bike clothing and accessories. I built the Sausalito Cyclery. We were the #1 independent bike store in California, one of the top 10 in the country. We were doing $4 million a year in sales out of that place, with $1 million in inventory on the floor. I bought the top shit. You couldn't even get into the store half the time. We were blasting 20 to 30 high-end bikes a day out of there. When the first commercial models from Specialized came out, mountain bikes started taking off. We bought them. We started seeing the trend. People started buying these things. They were trading in their road bikes. Pretty soon we couldn't even take trade-ins because nobody wanted road bikes anymore. We put mannequins in the store with the bike clothing, and we got a review in a bike magazine saying we were the only bike store in America that displays clothing on mannequins. I made my own mountain bike, the Red Rocker. I landed the cover of Mountain Bike magazine with this thing. I had 2 lights on it, and I was the first bike builder to use black components. Before the Red Rocker, everything was chrome. You had the bike, whatever color, you had black tires, sometimes white walls, everything else was chrome. I wanted everything red and black, no chrome. It took me a year and a half. Gary Fisher made my frames. There were different gear people in Japan. They made me enough parts for 100 Red Rockers, 2 water bottles, 2 mag lights, and all black components. Rims, spokes, bolts. It was a really badass machine. We sold out instantly. Bang, gone. We had 10,000 back orders from around the country. We went back to Japan where our suppliers told us the most they would make was 300 this year. Meanwhile, here comes Specialized with their red and black rock hopper. Rock hopper? Red rocker? Pure coincidence, I'm sure. And they stepped on me. They had components for 50,000 bikes. I got out of the business, but I was pissed. I'd been totally ready to take over the mountain bike world. The Sausalito store was a gold mine, but Bucky wasn't running the place. He couldn't. He'd show up late and yell, "Fuck you," at someone and walk out. Everybody loved him, but you couldn't put him in charge. Instead, he worked the floor. After months of this, I finally had to sell Corte Madera because Sausalito killed it. Everyone came to Sausalito because it was built right on the bike path. With all these different businesses going on outside of my music, I was making some money and I began buying things. I bought a couple other houses beyond the one in Marin County. I started getting into Ferraris. I started developing a taste for fine wines. One night when I was in Montrose, I tasted a 1945 Latour and a 1927 Martinez port on the same night, and I started to build a collection of fine wines. I made concert promoters provide me with certain vintage bottles backstage as part of my contractual requirements and take them home unopened. Bill Graham was hip to my chisel. He had all 5 bottles in my dressing room open so I couldn't take them home, and later gave me a recorking machine as a gift. I just started living the life. Betsy was able to spend a lot of money too. She was spending money to keep herself happy. She'd go shopping and refurnish the house. I'd come home and go, "What?" But since I was doing okay financially, I didn't really care. Things still weren't great between us though, and around then I finally had an affair. I'd been screwing around on the road here and there for years, but this was different. This was a real affair where I fell in love with another person. She was in the record business. I'd met her when I was recording my first album with Geffen in 1981. She represented a music publisher and maybe had a song for me. She was so independent. She lived by herself, owned her own house, drove a new car, worked hard at a good job, the opposite of Betsy. I fell in love with her and I began a long-running affair. I'd fly her out on tour. Betsy would leave and she would come in. I used to fake trips to Los Angeles to see her. I'd fly down for the day. She'd pick me up at the airport. We'd go to her house and have insane sex. She was so liberated. I loved that about her. It was like, my God, this woman can take care of me. After the affair had been going on for 2 years, I was ready to leave Betsy. But then I decided that first we needed to take a family vacation, this big trip to Africa. Betsy, Aaron, and I went to Italy, Sardinia, Egypt, and Kenya, where we spent 6 weeks on safari. We were gone the whole summer of 1983. I was looking to figure out what I was going to do with my girlfriend. I needed to figure myself out. I was planning on leaving Betsy. I was in love. We were in Sardinia. Aaron was out at the pool, and Betsy and I had a quick daytime throwdown. It was a beautiful day, and everything was right. I knew immediately she was pregnant. That had happened the first time with Aaron, too. That time, we did it while we were listening to Procol Harum's Salty Dog album on a tiny record player in a hotel room. And afterward, I just knew. In Sardinia, it wasn't like it was amazing sex or something. It was actually a kind of a quickie deal. But you could tell something happened. Sure enough, we get to Africa, and Betsy's kind of sick all the time in the morning. We arrived at the Mount Kenya Safari Club just in time to see Robert De Niro leaving. He was with this little kid and a white-haired guy in a Land Rover pulling out as we pulled up. It was British-style, old colonial. I hated the place. After 5 o'clock, men were required to wear a coat and tie. Women had to be in evening gowns. Children weren't even allowed out of their rooms after 5 o'clock. Betsy was sick. She couldn't leave the room anyway. They treated you real well and the place was gorgeous, but it was stupid fancy. It was a bird sanctuary. They had these black guys with white gloves and tuxedos going around with little brooms and buckets sweeping up bird poop. But best coffee I ever had in my life? Mount Kenya Safari Club, no question. Anyway, we went all over Kenya and Tanzania on these safaris, like the governor's camp, which is camping but very elegant. De Niro was there. He was on the same safari I was, either coming or going. A couple of times we'd see each other in the bar, had a couple of words. Hi, I'm a big fan, yeah. He didn't know who I was, but he knew I was somebody. Long hair fucking hippie looking dude in this place? Going home, we flew from Kenya to London, 14 hours, and changed to the Concorde. I was really splurging, first class all the way. Flew the Concorde to New York, changed planes for Albany, where I picked up a rent-a-car, and started driving to our log cabin in Lake Placid, where Aaron went to school. We were taking him back to North Country School to start in September. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when the cop pulled me over. We'd been traveling for 24 hours. I was burnt. While I was out of the country, they changed the speed limits. The cop starts writing me the ticket. Officer, I said, I was only going 62. Around here, he said, we give tickets for 62. He was parked behind some trees on a 4-lane highway. Nobody on the road, middle of the night. I looked at Betsy. I can't drive 55, I said. As soon as I heard myself say it, I went, whoa. Grabbed some paper and a pen. I started writing the lyrics. As he's writing the ticket, I'm writing the lyrics. The cop came back, he handed me the ticket, and I said, thank you, sir. I went straight to my house in Lake Placid, a 3-hour drive from Albany. By the time we got there, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. I had a guitar and an amp in my basement. I went downstairs, picked up my guitar, turned on the little tape recorder, and wrote the damn song right there on the spot. The whole time we were in Africa, I'd been writing songs because I knew I was coming back to do this thing with Neal Schon of Journey. My first idea for a supergroup. HSAS, Hagar, Schon, Aronson, Shreve. Neal and I had it all planned. When I got back and found out Betsy was pregnant, I kind of decided to end my affair, or at least started slowing down. I had a pregnant wife on my hands, and I thought this wasn't the time to leave anybody. It ripped me up because I really was in love with this woman, too. But the day Betsy went into the hospital to have Andrew on June 4th, 1984, I called the girl from the music publisher from the hospital and cut it off. I've got a new baby boy, I told her. I'll never see you again. I never did. When a baby's born, it is a miracle. You can read the Bible or other books and you hear about miracles. You want something to affect you and change your life like that? You want to see Jesus walk on water? You want to see someone heal, take a cripple and make him walk? You want to see those things. We all want that. When you see a baby born, you see that. It shipped me right into shape. I had the whole world in my hands and I watched this baby being born. I was ready to give up anything for that, for my kids and my wife, so that we could continue to be that family together. There's just something about seeing a child being born. Creation. Isn't that as close to God as you're ever going to get? When I turned my focus back to HSAS, I had all these songs like Giza and Valley of the Kings that I had written in Africa and Egypt. These vibey kind of lyrics. And I had I Can't Drive 55 because I'd written it on the way home. But I didn't give it to the band. I didn't even tell Neal. I just kept it in my pocket. I wrote the whole song anyway, and Neal and I were supposed to be co-writing everything on the new project. I don't think I was being cheesy or cagey, just that was my song and I saved it for myself. Good thinking it turned out. The HSAS thing didn't really work. Neal and I had wanted to do something together, but I don't know why we got bassist Kenny Aronson and drummer Michael Shreve. They were good and everything, but it was more a matter of who was available. Aronson had played with Billy Squier, and Neal knew Shreve from when they played at Santana together. Shreve, who was a great rhythmical guy, wasn't a rock drummer at all, and we were a rock band. But he made the band kind of cool and fusiony. We did 12 shows in November 1983 around the Bay Area, all sold out for a band nobody ever heard before, and gave all the money to arts and music programs in public schools. We cut the album live, which I thought was sort of adventurous, but it never sold more than 150,000. Even though I was selling more than 1 million as a solo artist, and Journey was selling more than 1 million with Neal. It never caught on. A Whiter Shade of Pale, which was the single, didn't really work, never hit. We played an MTV show called The Concert. Neal and I went to New York and did press for days, but it just never took off. It might have been better if we'd gone in the recording studio, made the record, and then done the shows. But the way we did it was unique. We never toured again. I went right back to record I Can't Drive 55, which ended up on my album VOA. was produced by Ted Templeman, Montrose's old record producer who fronted me the budget for my first solo demos. And I recorded it at Fantasy Studios in Berkeley, this large orchestral room where Journey just finished recording their album, Escape. I did all the demos at my little studio in my house in Mill Valley. David Louser came over and laid down drum beats, and the two of us would spend 10 or 12 hours every day in my basement, working up a bunch of ideas. VOA with I Can't Drive 55 really took off when it was released in August 1984 and made my business ridiculously big. I Can't Drive 55 was not my biggest hit by any measure, but it means more than any song I've ever written. At the time, 55 only went to number 26 on the charts. It wasn't even a top 10 hit, but it was the one that really sold the records and kicked my concert business into the stratosphere. The tour for VOA was my most successful. I sold out arenas everywhere, 2, 3, or 4 nights in some places. One of the top 5 grossing tours in 1984, right up there with Van Halen, who broke at the same time with Jump and all that. I remember getting an award in Portland, Oregon. I sold out 2 nights and got the show of the year. Van Halen was runner-up. We were neck and neck on the road. They had a much bigger record. My album was 1.6 million, but they ended up selling 10 million records. My records were never up to my box office. There would be a guy like Greg Kihn or Tommy Tutone who had his moment where he sold as many records as I ever did, maybe even more. But they could never sell out arenas, and I could go out and do multiple arenas. I was a live performer who came up as an opening act. My albums were just ways to get me back out on tour until I met John Kalodner and Geffen, who got my records going. Kalodner and Geffen also got me doing music videos, which pushed my VOA tour even more. The video to I Can't Drive 55 was huge on MTV. Doubled or tripled my box office business and did for me instantly what radio never did. It made me a star. The All-Music cable channel started in 1981, but it took a few years for the idea to catch on with local cable companies and the public. Once MTV did catch on, it had incredible power, and making videos was almost as important as making records. Three Lock Box had been my first video in 1982, and I'd noticed it changed me from being relatively anonymous to anyone but my fans, to someone that old ladies recognized walking through airports. But the I Can't Drive 55 video took everything to a new level. Kalodner put me together with director Gil Bettman, who had done great car scenes as director of the TV series Knight Rider. It was like shooting a movie. $250,000 budget, 4-day shoot, 12-hour days at different locations all over Southern California. We rented a wing of an old hospital in Los Angeles and built a jail, put up bars, and a courthouse where the judge sat and the old lady hit me with the umbrella. We used real California Highway Patrol officers in one shot where they wrestled me down on the hood of the car. I got to drive my Boxer 512 flat out. We went out in the desert by Palmdale where I could go 170 miles an hour. Gil dug holes in the ground and put cameras in them to drive over. That song changed my relationship with the California Highway Patrol. At that point in my life, I'd had 36 tickets. My license taken away 3 times. I was paying $125,000 a year for car insurance because I had all these hot cars. I'd been to traffic school. I had hired attorneys. I raised as much as I possibly could, legally and financially, and I was still in bad shape. I Can't Drive 55 changed everything. Since I wrote that song, I've maybe had 2 citations. I've been pulled over at least 40 times, stopped and let go. Some of the stories are classic. I was driving my Ferrari one night from San Francisco to Malibu with Betsy. This was later during my first year with Van Halen, and was rolling between 150 and 160 all the way down Highway 101. As I approached Santa Barbara in the Ojai area, where there are all these speed traps, I decided to cut my speed. I'd been checking my rearview mirror the whole way and couldn't see anything behind me. Up ahead is a roadblock, 2 California Highway Patrol cars. I didn't think there was any way this was for me when I pulled over. About the same time, a helicopter lands and 3 other Highway Patrol cars pull up. They had been chasing me for a while. I just didn't know it. Those little 5-liter Mustangs are good for 140 miles an hour max. I was blowing them off so bad I couldn't see them in the rearview mirror. The cop got out of his car, shaking, with his gun in his hand. Get out of the car, he said. I got out. You better have a good excuse, he said. Sir, I do not have a good excuse, I said. I was just having a good time. I have a fast car. I've been to driving schools and taken race car courses. I didn't think I was in danger. I was not reckless driving. He backed off and holstered his gun. He walked off, took off his hat, and wiped his brow, replaced his hat and came back. Okay, how fast were you going? He asked. I was really going fast, I said, probably around 150. He threw his hands in the air and marched back to his car to the other guys to confer. Everybody was worked up. My life was in danger, one of the other cops kept yelling at Betsy. Finally, the cop with the gun sent everybody else away. They took off. The guy took his hat off again and pulled me over to the hood of my car and leaned against it. He started telling me his troubles. He had looked at the license and knew who I was. You know, I've got kids and this is a really stressful job, he said. And here you are, a rock star. Your life's in your hands. You got anything you want. I was chasing you down the road thinking, I want to kill this guy when I pull him over. And you sit there so calm. You tell me how fast you were going. You didn't lie to me. He sat there forever singing the blues to me about his life. At the end, he stood up, put out his hand and said, nice to meet you. The wackiest pullover ever. Just recently, I was blasting down 101 in Marin County going to rehearse with my new band, Chickenfoot, driving my Boxer 512 from the I Can't Drive 55 video, doing about 90, when I flew past a cop onto the freeway. Sure enough, he pulls me over. I came to a stop on the side of the freeway and rolled down my window. He came up and squatted down, his dark visor down on his helmet. He held up his radar gun, pointed it at my face, and was flashing 55, 55, 55, 55. He pulled off his helmet and he has the biggest shit-eating grin on his face. I've been waiting for you, man, he said. All the fellas told me you're around here and they see you all the time. I'm the biggest fan you ever had. I just got out here from the South. I've been on the force for 2 months now and I'm telling you, man, I've been looking for you. And I got you. You write a song like that and no telling what happens. I wish I was smart enough to say I'd done it on purpose. Even though I made a lot of money on that tour, I came home from it ready to take a year off and figured things out. Betsy was on my ass all the time. She wanted me off the road and we just had Andrew. I told her we would buy a house out in the country. I went out and looked at this place in Nicasio as well as a property in Big Sur. We were really going to go remote, try to get off the grid. I've been reading this book, The Coming Hard Times, by this guy who said the banks were going to collapse. Everything was going to fall apart. The bottom's going to come out of society. And gold was the only thing that would be valued. Paper money would be worth nothing. I really believed this shit. I was looking for a cabin in the woods with 100 acres. I was stocking up food. I got guns. I had all my ammunition, not to kill people, but to eat. I learned how to kill animals. I went hunting all the time. I learned how to kill a deer and skin it, how to cure it and eat it. I was going to go Ted Nugent on everybody. I was going to hunt and fish. I was going to put a racetrack on the spread and have all my cars. The more I thought about things, the more I decided to stop the grind, album tour, album tour, album tour for my wife and family. I was burned out. I'd been on the road for more than 10 years, and before that I'd had a hard life. Work, work, work. Now I had everything going. I had my bike stores, my travel agency, my fire sprinkler business. I had my apartment buildings. My business manager had done a great job for me. I was set. I didn't even need any royalties. I was at a peak and I felt like the fucking king. I could do whatever I wanted. I had $3 million in the bank and I could see daylight. I would do one more record and one more tour, put away another $2 billion, and retire altogether. Between all the other businesses and the money I already had, it was not necessarily a lot of income, but certainly more than enough to live on. I was ready to give up everything. Betsy was pressuring me, I was seeing things her way, and then Eddie Van Halen called. Chapter 7, 5150. I came off the tour, I was fried crisp. I cut off all my hair. I canceled the last 4 dates on the tour after I hurt my foot, twisted my ankle in Connecticut and couldn't walk on it. I tried to do one show like that, gave up and went home. We had done 90 shows that year. My Ferrari 512, the car from the I Can't Drive 55 video, was sitting in Claudio Zampoli's shop in Van Nuys where I'd bought it. He was an Italian mechanic who doubled as a salesman. He's actually the guy I'm talking to at the beginning of the I Can't Drive 55 video. He didn't run a dealership or anything, but he'd buy a car for you. He used to work for Ferrari as a test driver. It took 9 months to get the 512 after I ordered it. They made like 12 that year. Anyway, after I'd had the car for a little while, it needed a tune-up, which on these special cars is a very big, expensive operation. It's really a race car, and a tune-up can cost as much as an ordinary new car. I went home without picking up my car. Eddie Van Halen drove a Lamborghini, a Countach, and Claudio worked on his cars too. Eddie saw my car at Claudio's and asked him about it. "Hey man, nice car," he said. "Whose car's that?" "Sammy Hagar," said Claudio. "You should call him and get him in the band." Everybody knew that vocalist David Lee Roth had left Van Halen a couple of months earlier. He quit the band almost as soon as his little solo single, Just a Gigolo, started to do something. It was too soon to say they were floundering, but their predicament was public knowledge. "You got his number?" Eddie said. At my house, the phone rang. It was Eddie Van Halen. "Hey man, what are you doing?" he said. "I just came off tour and I'm just kind of nursing my foot," I said. "Would you like to get together, come down and jam?" he said, "and maybe join Van Halen?" "Not really," I said. "I'm burnt. I'd love to meet you, but..." I'd only met Eddie briefly a couple of times. We'd done a couple of big festivals together and he'd come to my dressing room. "I'm such a big Montrose fan," he had said. What a nice guy, I thought, so humble and sweet. When you shook his hand, he was always holding yours with both his hands and adding in a little bow. "How about tomorrow?" he said. "Nah, man, I can't," I said. "I'm burnt. A couple of days at least. Let me call you back." We exchanged numbers and hung up. I started thinking, maybe if they're broken up, I could get Eddie in my band. I could use a gunslinger like him. Or maybe I'll just write some songs with him and get him to play on my next record. I was a big fan. But I hated Dave. That guy rubbed me wrong. I'm sure I rub all kinds of people wrong, so it's not like I'm putting him down. The guy was a great frontman, great attitude in rock, and he had an image from hell. But I just couldn't stand the guy. He was the opposite of what I believed in when I met him. First of all, the guy's not a great singer. And he acts like he's the coolest, hottest guy in the world, when to me, he looks gay. The guy was never believable to me. The call didn't come as a complete surprise. Ted Templeman had been the one to tell me that Roth had split a few months earlier, and at the time I told Betsy they're gonna call me, you watch. Who else were they gonna get? There was Ozzy Osbourne, Ronnie James Dio, and me. When Eddie did call, I was sitting there with goosebumps on my arm. I went down to see him a couple of days later. I walked into their place in Studio City. Alex Van Halen took one look at my short hair and started laughing. "You look like somebody put a donut on your head and cut it off," he said. I had the sides shaved and left just a little bit on top. I was taking a year off. Alex was drunk on his ass. He was drinking a case of tall malt liquor cans a day. He pounded them too. He could shotgun like nobody. He always wanted to have contests. He would pass out a couple of times a day, wake up, and shotgun 2 or 3 beers, crack one more, and walk out of the room. Eddie drank all day too. They both woke up, grabbed a beer, lit a cigarette, and that was the way they started their day. Midday, around 4 o'clock, they would take a nap. They were both big nap heads. Eddie lived in a very humble house with his wife, Valerie Bertinelli, the actress. It was actually Valerie's house. Eddie just moved in with her. She also had another place, a sort of beach house in Malibu, and they split their time between her 2 homes. The main one, though, was up in the hills off Coldwater Canyon. It was just an ordinary 2-bedroom house with a garage that he converted into a studio. They called the studio 5150 after the police code for picking up a crazy person. It was not a rock star home, and the studio was a dump. They were recording through a homemade board that could have come out of a Cracker Jack box built by engineer Don Landy. Landy could make the board sound brilliant, but he was a genius and knew how to work it. To anybody else, it was like model airplane gear. The studio was filthy. Beer cans everywhere, ashtrays full of cigarettes. Don Landy had to blow away the cigarette ashes just to plug something into the board. The place smelled like the worst bar on the planet. I don't think it had ever been cleaned. Eddie's guitars were lying on the floor, nothing on racks, nothing in cases, just on the floor, on chairs, leaning against amps, against the wall, a pile of them in the corner. It was beautiful, but I'd never seen anything like it. Eddie walked in wearing a pair of those shades with louvers in them. He'd been up all night drinking, trying to write some music. I didn't know these guys. I didn't know what their routine was, but they were beat up. Eddie was wearing a pair of wrinkled pants. When I went into their house later that day, I saw why. He and Valerie were living out of their suitcases. They had been off the road for a few months, but they didn't have their stuff hanging in their closets. It was sitting in their suitcases on the floor. There were piles of stuff everywhere. It was weird. They could afford maids, but they didn't have them. They were kids. If you really look at it, they had been out on the road for 5 years and had only recently come home. Eddie never bothered to unpack. He was always pulling clothes out, finding something halfway clean but wrinkled. I found all this kind of humorous, like, far out, these guys really don't care. I thought that was pretty cool. I came from a different world, Betsy's world. My clothes were pressed. My socks were ironed, folded, and put in the closet. I was actually wearing a suit. Armani linen jacket and slacks, t-shirt and tennis shoes, kind of Miami Vice. I ate in good restaurants and drank fine wine. Eddie would throw a hot dog and bun out of the freezer in the microwave, nuke it, plow it into his mouth, and chug it down with a beer. There were old pizza boxes lying around. The refrigerator was full of frozen burritos. Al was the crazy one. He was obnoxious, drunk, making comments, laughing about stupid things, smoking cigarettes. Here, he would say, shotgun his beer. I don't drink beer. When I got there, they'd been up all night writing. They had what became Summer Nights and what became Good Enough. Eddie, Al, and the bassist Mike Anthony had stayed up jamming. I arrived at about noon and they still hadn't been to bed yet. And they were ripped. They had been drinking the whole time. I went down to check out Eddie. In my head, there was no way I was joining Van Halen. We started playing and the engineer Don Landy recorded everything we did. I made up the first line on the spot, Summer Nights in my radio. It just popped into my head the first time I heard that riff. The rest of the song I scattered my way through. I did the same thing with Good Enough. I really had my scat together. Eddie couldn't believe it. Dave apparently didn't have good rhythm and wasn't a great singer, didn't have any range. I was singing Eddie's guitar licks with him. After 5 hours, they were freaking out. We've got a band, they kept saying. I don't know, I said to them. It sounds great, but let's talk about it. Maybe I'll come back next week or something. They wanted me to stay, but I went home and took a cassette. We jammed a blues song and we had the other stuff that we worked up. After dinner, I put the tape on my stereo. I got the goosebumps all over my body. I heard it. I realized it was Cream all over again, my favorite rock band ever. There was something about it that was slow, confident, almost majestic. My rock had always been more intense. They were relaxed into this groove thing, even if it was up-tempo. Alex lay back, like Ginger Baker always did. Eddie played the way Clapton played, deep in the pocket. He didn't speed up anything. I'd never played with guys like that before. I called Ed Loeffler and told him I'm doing it. He told me I was crazy. He thought the Van Halens were nuts and that I was crazy to even think about doing it. Then he went right to work. Let me see what I can do, he said. Loeffler looked over their situation. Those guys were in bad shape financially. They had made a lot of money, but they had spent it all. They had overhead like crazy. When Loeffler found out how much the guys made the year before, he told me I was going to have to take a pay cut to join the band. But once we started playing the music, I knew it was all going to happen. Eddie was a man of few words. His favorite line was, yeah, yeah, yeah. All he cared about was getting some rest, having a couple of beers, some cigarettes, and playing music. Eddie wasn't really a driven musician. At one point, making the first album, I grew nervous with his nonchalance, his lack of concern for the whole thing. It wasn't like he was the musical genius telling everybody what to play. Al played the way he wanted, Mike was playing what he wanted, Eddie didn't even know what the lyrics were. He was just concerned about his guitar part. That's all he paid attention to. When I wrote the song Love Walks In, his wife Valerie was so in love with the first ballad they'd ever done, she made him listen to the lyrics. He got all choked up. "Wow, I'd never listened to lyrics before," he said. He couldn't sing you one song. He didn't even know what fucking Dave was singing about. He was listening to his guitar and the groove and making sure that his part was okay. Mike was my Ed McMahon, always ready to back the play, whatever it was. Eddie and Al were tight as nails. They didn't get too far from each other, passed their cigarettes back and forth. One wouldn't light one without lighting one for the other guy. They only needed one match. They never walked into the room with just their own beer. They always had a beer in their pocket for the other guy. It was beautiful unless they'd start fighting. Then it was terrible. When they were both drinking, they'd fight at least once a week. I mean, go at it. Fist fights. Mike and I would try to pull them apart. We'd break them up and leave. Al would drive back after we left and they'd go at it again. The next day we'd come to the studio, the windshield would be busted out of the car, the trash can turned over. I didn't see much of Eddie's wife, but Valerie, wow, what a cool chick. I pulled into the driveway one time and Valerie and Eddie were sitting on the hood of one of Ed's cars drinking a beer. I thought that was so cool. My wife would never do that. Valerie could hang with the boys. She wasn't around a lot because she was working. She pretty much always had a gig, some kind of little movie or TV part. She also spent a lot of time at their beach house. The sense of family ran strong in Van Halen. When I first joined, their father Jan was always there, drinking and smoking. Mike Anthony was the most loyal dog on the planet. He was the flag bearer. From the start, they trusted me and I became the motivator. They loved that and they rallied behind me. It was very family, very close, us against the world. This is our place. We're working on our record. We didn't argue about nothing. It was a dream come true. Still, there was a lot of doubt about Van Halen. At the time, no one seemed to have confidence in the band's future. Roth had split with the road crew, the management, and he looked like he was going to launch big time on his own and leave the band in his dust. People were suggesting that we call it Van Hagar, which was a terrible idea. Funny though, I didn't know it at the time. Dad always claimed to be Irish, but we were actually Dutch, and our family name may really have been Van Hagar once upon a time. In spite of the doubt, we already knew it was going to work because we were the ones in the studio working up the 5150 record, and we knew we had some killer tracks. We had Why Can't This Be Love? However, nobody but us had heard any of this because we couldn't tell anyone that we were even in the studio together. Everything had been taking place in secret because I was signed to Geffen and Van Halen were on Warner Brothers. Although we didn't know it, Geffen and Warner Brothers were already butting heads. As Geffen's distributor, Warner Brothers was taking 50% of Geffen's earnings and I was Geffen's biggest artist at that time. Elton John hadn't worked on Geffen's label. Neil Young was a disaster. Geffen ended up suing him. Donna Summer didn't have any hits for him. There was me, Don Henley, who had one big album, and John Lennon, who died shortly after giving Geffen his first album, although it did sell millions after he was shot. Geffen wasn't likely to let his biggest act walk across the street just because he wanted to sing with another band. Loeffler and I went to see David Geffen. As we expected, he did not like the idea and wanted to talk me out of it. "Why would you want to be in that band?" he said. "You're as big as them on your own." He was baffled. He was sitting on his desk, his hand on his head. "I don't understand this," he said. Like a lot of people, he thought David Lee Roth would be an impossible act to follow, and he said so. After a few minutes of talking it through, he shifted his tone suddenly. "I would never stop an artist from doing what they want to do," he said. "I'm David Geffen. I stand up for the artist. I'm for the artist. Number one, it's about you and your life." He said he would talk to Mo Austin, the chairman of Warner Brothers Records. With Warner Brothers over a barrel, Geffen told them he would let them have me for one album. if he could have a Sammy Hagar solo album immediately following. He wanted 100% of the solo album and 50% of the Van Halen records on Warner Brothers. Warner's chief Mo Austin came to Eddie's 5150 Studios to talk things over. He was, let's say, cautious. He suggested changing the band's name, and he also liked the Van Hagar idea. Eddie and I powwowed about it and decided no, we're Van Halen. We loved each other. There was no animosity, no egos, no nothing. They wanted me to be in this band, and I wanted to be in it because we were making the music and we knew we were good. Mo asked if he could hear something, so we put on our instruments, and while he sat there, we played Why Can't This Be Love for him, live and in person. He put his finger in the air and smiled. I smell money, Mo said. By the time we got the green light from Warner Brothers and Geffen, we were already halfway through the record. After that, we went full force and things started happening fast. Eddie and Al had a lot of music left over from what would have been the next Van Halen record before Roth split. They had a lot of sort of semi-formed ideas when I walked in on it. I had to write all the lyrics and melodies. I worked on their jams, picked them apart and made songs out of them. I was kind of behind the 8-ball on the lyrics. We would jam in the studio for hours. I would have a handheld mic and headphones and would just sing and experiment. When something was good, I'd point at the engineer to tell him to make a cassette. I would take the cassette to the parts that I wanted to keep with me when I drove back to Malibu, which was about an hour's drive. I would drive home, ears bleeding, and listen to the songs. Both Ed and Al smoked in the studio like chimneys. Those guys would be lighting them up, setting one down, light up another, put it in an ashtray. They'd have 3 or 4 cigarettes going at one time. They were chain smokers, lighting a cigarette off the other cigarette, letting the filter burn in the ashtray. Never put them out. Dropping them on the floor. I'd have these terrible headaches when I'd get home at 3 o'clock in the morning and go straight to the shower because I stank like cigarette smoke. One night, on the drive home, I was listening to this tape where Eddie had written the music and noodled the verses on guitar. He was trying to show me the phrasing of the verses, but he couldn't because he couldn't play the rhythm and the lead at the same time. I didn't get what he was doing. But on the way home, I heard the rhythm of the thing, and I started singing it in the car. We didn't have a chorus, and I just busted out with Best of Both Worlds. It hit me hard, right when I was pulling in the garage. Bang! The chorus hit. I went in the shower, but it kept coming out to dry off and write some more lyrics on a notepad. Then I get back in the shower and get right back out to scribble down some more. The song came to me like a flood. I don't know about lyricists. Lyricist Bernie Taupin once told me that it's the easiest thing in the world for him. Once he has a title and a concept, he can just go bam, 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 bam. It's done. This song was coming at me like a tidal wave. I couldn't even take a shower. Usually I get pieces that I can remember. I just keep singing them over in my head and write them down later. I wrote the whole song while I was still taking the shower. I went in the next day and sang it. Everybody was blown away. That was Best of Both Worlds. Before I wrote Love Walks In, Eddie had never really played a real keyboard ballad in his whole life up to that point. With Roth, the closest thing was Wait off 1984, which was a synth track, but it was a rocker. It wasn't a beautiful melody. I've been reading this book by Ruth Montgomery called Aliens Among Us. She claims to be an automatic writer. She just gets a pencil, closes her eyes, and goes into a trance, and the writing comes through her. The book was about walk-ins, aliens who come and take over your body in your sleep. A person can actually not die and still become a whole different person. They wake up one morning and can't remember who the hell they were. I wrote about how love comes walking in and can make you a whole new person. After Valerie forced Eddie to listen to the lyrics, Eddie and I became the closest of collaborators, trusting and loving with each other from that point forward. Before I joined Van Halen, I'd already committed to Farm Aid in September 1985, and we decided that would be the place we would make the announcement. I wanted to really do this big time. I rented a private plane for my band for our last show. I gave everybody a nice bonus. They'd all bought houses already, but I gave them enough to pay them off if they wanted. I brought Eddie up to rehearse with us. Eddie and I wrote 3 songs in 2 days while he was in town. We rehearsed Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll with Eddie for Farm Aid. It was gonna be great. Too bad I screwed everything up. At Farm Aid, you could only do 3 or 4 songs. Willie Nelson, John Cougar Mellencamp, and Neil Young organized the 12-hour marathon fundraiser that was broadcast live on radio and television. Largely a country show with acts like Chris Christopherson and Jimmy Buffett. It wasn't a rock show. Dylan was as hard-rocking as it had gotten when my turn came. I was going to open with One Way to Rock, follow with I Can't Drive 55, and bring out Eddie, make the announcement that I was joining Van Halen, and play rock and roll. When I went out, right away I had that stadium rocking. They loved me, were going crazy. I was scoring, it was big for me. 90,000 people in Champaign, Illinois, one of my biggest regions. I could do 2 nights in Chicago, 2 nights in Champaign, 2 nights in Peoria. Illinois was my state. I was ripping it up when I stepped up to the mic to introduce I Can't Drive 55. Here's a song for all you tractor-pulling motherfuckers, I said. And instantly, they shut down the radio broadcast and turned off the live TV feed. I ruined everything. When I brought out Eddie, we were long off the air. Nobody saw or heard a thing. He did a quick little solo. We made the announcement and went into the Led Zeppelin number. That was the first time we played together in public. Eddie was on the plane with us. We all flew back happy. It was a friendly transition from my band to Van Halen. Many years later, David Louser went to a cattle call audition for drummers for Maria McKee, the former vocalist of Lone Justice, this country rock band signed to Geffen that was going to follow us at Farm Aid. Back then, they thought they had the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt all rolled together, but Lone Justice was not to be. A number of years later, the singer was looking for a drummer, and Louser looked like he was going to get the job. He's down to the final interview with the lady herself, and she says, "Tell me about yourself. What have you done in the past?" Louser says, "I've worked for Sammy Hagar all my life." She gets up and walks out of the room. I guess there was still some animosity about that. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. When I first went down to join Van Halen, I moved into a rented house. But then a place in foreclosure came up for sale next door to Eddie and Valerie in Malibu. They lived on a bluff, a little house in the middle, and my house. It was all brand new, but the contractor went under and the bank had it. I made them a ridiculously low offer and got the house. I moved in next door to Eddie. It was amazing that a place would come up on Broad Beach Road, one of the most desirable spots in North Malibu, especially at bargain basement rates. It seemed like karma. Betsy was grooving. She dug the house and she liked the beach. She didn't care about Malibu, but there were horses right down the street. You can rent a villa in the south of France for what we paid for her horses at the Malibu stables. But she was happy. When I joined Van Halen, it shook up Betsy bad at first. She'd been ready for me to slow down and get out of the business. She wasn't ready for me to start with a totally new band. But when the house came up in Malibu, she started to see things differently. I would go to work every day and come home at night. We were recording the album and rehearsing for the tour. She was living in this beautiful beach house. She had her roses in the garden and her horses down the lane. She drove either her brand new Jaguar or the Land Rover. I used to drive to the studio with Eddie every day. He and I had the cars. We'd take either the Ferrari, the Lamborghini, my E-Jag, or my Cobra. On the way into the studio one day, we drove past a dealer and saw an E-Jag sitting there. I stopped. I went in and got my business manager on the phone, handed the salesman the phone, and the two of them put the deal together. I went out to get in the car and drive to the studio. I slid in behind the wheel, and wait a minute, what's with the seat? I'm not that big myself, but whoever drove this car before was one short dude. Whose car is this? It belonged to Ronnie James Dio. I loved that. Eddie and I did crazy shit like that. We'd race home, me in one of my Ferraris, Eddie in one of his Lamborghinis, driving 140, 150 miles an hour. He would always be drunk. Every day we'd go from 2 in the afternoon until past midnight unless Al passed out. Al was a bad drunk, but Eddie used to nurse his beers. He'd always be drinking, but didn't get all fucked up. Al would get fucked up, puke, pass out. You'd have to slap him around, let him rest for a couple hours, get him up and bring him back. We would limit the amount of beer he could have, and he would duck out for a pack of cigarettes, run downtown, buy a bottle of vodka, and drink it in the store. Their father liked to drink too. If we were in the studio at 2 in the afternoon, it wasn't like Eddie got up at 8 in the morning, more like noon. I'd get to the studio and the three of them would be sitting there drinking, having gone through a couple of six-packs already. Their dad, Jan Van Halen, was a great guy. I felt close to him. He was a sax player. He liked my chops, liked that I could sing. But those guys drank. Al wasn't drunk like my father. He couldn't stop. He drank until he passed out, woke up, and started over again. He would find people in bars and offer them money to put out a cigarette on their arm or shave their head while he videotaped the whole deal. Completely nuts. When I first made their scene, they were still laughing about Al's birthday performance. Legend has it they'd all gone to a Benihana. He was already drunk when they got there. It's his birthday. He's drinking hot sake and everything else. He gets up on the table, takes his shirt off, and starts to dance. Right on the hot grill. The guy just finished cooking dinner on it. Al pulls his pants down and fuck with the people in the place. He trips himself because he's got his pants around his ankles and lands on the grill on his back. He can't get up. He flops over like prawns. Ah! 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 He couldn't do anything. He was on the grill. They had to pull him off and, of course, take him to the hospital. He had burns all over. Like Leffler said, these guys were crazy. Very high maintenance, but good-hearted. Another time during the 5150 sessions, we were waiting for Claudio to bring back one of my cars around 2 in the afternoon. I bet you I could shotgun 10 beers, Al said. He's got 10 talls of malt liquor. I bet you $1,000, he said. Al's a betting man. One time he lost his BMW to me on a bet. I made him pay up, too, and gave it to our tour manager for Christmas. Al was a great guy, but just a total fuck-up. I was not betting him. Oh, yeah? He said. Watch this. Michael Anthony was standing there with me. Pow, 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 pow. Al opened them all first and then drained them one at a time. How can you even hold that much in your belly? I thought, oh no, this day is over. Al walked out of the driveway, big belch, and grabbed a broomstick. My dad used to do this, he said. You ever see anybody do this? He was standing on the asphalt in the driveway, holding the broomstick out in front of him with both hands. I looked at him and wondered, what the fuck's he doing? He's gonna jump over the broomstick while holding it in his hands. At that moment,